Okay, so when we're looking at mass extinctions, we have to think about mass extinctions in two ways. First is the opposite of what you see here. In other words, a mass extinction by definition would reduce biodiversity. Yet here they talk about biodiversity being stimulated, in other words, increasing because of these mass extinctions. Well, how can both be true? Let's think about it this way. Some of you may know how rose bushes work. Perhaps your mothers or fathers or grandparents raise roses. But in a rose garden, one of the things that I found interesting is that roses, when they're, I know they look more like carnations. You know I can't draw, so. However, if you look at a rose bush, at the end of the season, the growing season, at the end of the growing season, the rose bush people raising them might decide to prune them. This word prune just means you're going to come and remove sections, you remove whole branches. Now, why would someone who wants roses cut a rose bush back? Why would you prune heavily a rose bush? Well, it turns out that when you prune a rose bush, it actually stimulates the rose bush to grow back even more heavily, and you get more roses. The bush becomes healthier because of the stimulation caused by the pruning. So your bush actually becomes healthier and prettier. Now, that's fine for rose bush, so it's kind of okay. An example, as far as pruning back the tree of life, when we talk about the idea that you have all these different species, and when you talk about the tree of life, you have to think about, okay, well, there's these organisms that were growing, and then one common ancestor had a trait. Maybe they could swim, maybe they could crawl on land, and because they were able to crawl on land, they were able to take advantage of the opportunities. What kind of opportunities? Well, space, right? Because you need space to live. Those of you with a lot of people in a small space know that is a premium. Food, fresh water or water to drink. So resources, right? Resources. Imagine that prior to this point, all life was in the ocean. And now all of a sudden, these creatures had developed the ability to walk on land, perhaps even breathe air. So they were able to take advantage of any resources that were on the land. So they had now let's think about these creatures. Whatever they look like. Let's not worry about what they look like. Let's talk about this creature here. Let's call it creature A. Creature A is now able to take advantage of everything on the land. There's nothing on the land that's going to eat it. Nothing's going to hurt it because there's nothing to eat it. There's the first creature on land. So this first creature is able to eat, multiply. Perhaps it's more than one creature. Maybe they lay eggs. Maybe A lays eggs, and they're able to take their children are able to take advantage of all the different resources. Now you have to imagine that the very first creature to be able to walk on land probably went back and forth between water and land. They were protected on the land because all its predators were in the ocean, right? But A was able to spend a lot of time on land. The more time it could spend on land, the safer it was, the more resources it could take advantage of. So any of its children that might have, or its children's children, or its children's children's children, and so on, that had the ability to stay on land even longer, would have even a greater advantage. And perhaps some of those were able to take, to take advantage of different spaces, different what we call niches, which are different ecological resources in the ecosystem that they're able to take advantage of. So maybe these guys were able to take advantage of lowland areas, and you get another group, another population we'll call B. Then another population called C could take advantage of highlands. Maybe they're goat-like creatures or what have you. Maybe they have stronger legs. Maybe A could only crawl, but B could run. Whatever it is that could walk, and maybe then D could run. Okay. Then E, finally, maybe E could fly. Right? So something like this. This is all made up, obviously, but you can imagine that all this took place because one creature crawled on land. It was all the creatures on the land and the air had this one common ancestor, A, that crawled out of the ocean, was able to take advantage of this. Then, because of all these resources available, you had this quick adaptation, this quick ability to make a lot of babies, have a lot of genetic diversity. Why could you have such genetic diversity? Because it was tolerated. How was it tolerated? There was nothing that was going to eat the baby that was a little weaker, or the baby that was outcompeted. There was no real competition on the land because there was so many resources. Almost everything could survive as long as it could live and eat and take advantage of its space and water. It was able to exist. So there was a lot of genetic diversity. So you had the opportunity for the creature that could run, that could climb mountains, or run, or take care of valleys, or fly. These could take these niches, these ecological spaces with specific foods or what have you. They could take advantage. They could radiate. They could adapt and fill in every space. So radiation means spread, right? So they can spread because of their adaptations that would allow them to spread and fill in all those niches. But that's only because there was this empty space, the land, right, that had no life on it before. So that was the first creature that crawled out of the oceans, and they were able to take advantage. Now let's take a look at the historical record. So we have the Precambrian era, which mostly had to do with oceans, right? And most of these things lived in the oceans or in water, some kind of water environment. Then in the Cambrian era, you still had a lot of water creatures, mostly water creatures. There were probably a lot of perhaps some land creatures started to come out. In the late Paleozoic era, you start to get a lot of land creatures. Now the land is being taken advantage of. You have legs, you have toes, you have claws. Then you start to see insects that fly are starting to take advantage. So you have this radiation these areas that were previously in the Precambrian era were not being taken advantage of, the land, right? Because mostly it was the oceans and the rivers and lakes, or probably just the rivers and the oceans that were connected. Any lakes that were connected to the rivers also probably, right? So you have all these aquatic organisms filling in all the niches. Here you have some terrestrial organisms filling in all the niches. They radiate, they adapt, they grow. You have the dinosaurs at the peak of the Mesozoic era. You have all these dinosaurs. So you have the the great volcanoes, spewing forth lava and smoke, right? And forming new land, what have you. But you have your dinosaurs out here. You have your giant trees, and everybody's living their lives. All the great dinosaurs of the time, the Triceratops, the whatever, all right, T-Rexes. But then something happened, a disaster. A giant meteor plummets to Earth and blocks out the sun. And over some period of time, all these creatures die off. We call that a mass extinction. So now, what did that mass extinction do? It decreased biodiversity, right? I mean, the immediate effect. So the immediate effect of a mass extinction is the clearing off of the table, the pruning, right? The pruning, just like we pruned the rose bush, pruning the rose bush got rid of roses. It got rid of roses. The immediate effect was the number of roses decreased. But over time, the number of roses increased because it stimulated growth. Initially, when the land was first taken over by creatures, by living creatures, life adapted, life radiated, it spread. And every time a baby was born with a different trait because of a mutation, it was born with a trait that was able to allowed it to take advantage of a specific resource, or whether it be space or food or what have you. The niche, what we call the niche. These niches were all filled in. So by the time the Mesozoic era came along, a lot of niches were filled in. And the immediate effect of the mass extinction is that you prune the tree. You decreased biodiversity. That was the immediate effect. But then there's a long-term effect. Then over time, what happens, if you think about it, it makes sense. The immediate effect, for instance, on the dinosaurs was that most of the dinosaurs died. Only those dinosaurs that could take advantage of the niches that could perhaps fly, perhaps just be able to deal with the colder weather. Those dinosaurs were able to survive, but most of all the different kinds of the giant ones, the small ones, the medium-sized ones, the ones that swam, the ones that ran, the ones that flew, most of them died. Only those that were bird-like survived. And then you had other little animals like the mammals that were around at the time that could also survive. All they needed to do was survive that cataclysm, survive that disaster. And by surviving, they were able to send their genes to the next generation, and they were able then to live. Now all their predators were dead. Now there was nothing to eating their food. There was no competition. There was no predator eating them. There was plenty of resources. So they survived and they thrived and they multiplied. And they started to fill in those niches. They started to radiate. They started to spread. So because mass extinctions decrease biodiversity, they also decrease, in the long term, competition for resources. Right? And because you decrease competition, you also decrease the predators are gone. So you have a decrease in competition. You have predators decreasing. So there's plenty of ability for individuals with different traits for the mutations to survive, and they do. And they move forward and fill in all the niches. Since there is no competition, since there is no predator taking them out, they're able to, there's a lot of space, there's a lot of resources. They survive until you get some of those individuals outcompeting those that exist at the time. And what you get is these adaptations, these specializations, this what we call adaptive, right? Adaptive radiation. So that little mammal that was just barely able to survive when dinosaurs were trying to eat them, they were probably snacks or some really fast dinosaur, that they were furry, it was hot, they could come out only at night because it was probably very warm, it's difficult for them to survive, but they're running around like maybe mouse-like creatures, who knows what they were, I don't, but they're running around from place to place, these little mammals. Perhaps they're marsupials, perhaps they're oviparous, whatever. But they're running back and forth, surviving when the dinosaurs are around. The giant cataclysm happens, the meteor hits, wipes out all their predators. There's no more competition for resources since all the dinosaurs that used to be there are gone, except maybe for those that could fly, the birds. But there's so many resources, so many niches opened up, there's virtually no competition, virtually no predators. Well, those mice start to survive, and maybe one of those mice gets bigger. Maybe one of the babies mutates a gene to make it bigger. Another gene mutates a few generations later that makes it faster. Another gene mutates and makes, and so what you get is all these different changes adding up over millennia, over thousands of years, millions of years. These mutations start to add up, and what you get is this adaptive radiation, this spread from one lineage, from one line. You can get all these different species forming. So take a minute and read this from a site, Berkeley, Understanding Evolution, Berkeley's, University of Berkeley's, California, Berkeley's Understanding Evolution site. Take a minute and read this. Pause the video and read this. So as you can see, this story is not made up altogether, but actually explains a lot of the fossil record. It explains why we have so many different kinds of mammals today. They all started from little rodent-like mammals that existed at the time of the dinosaur. But as they spread, as the populations grew, as mutations accrued, as populations were isolated and could mate only with themselves over a long period of time, mutations layered upon mutations allowed them to take over niches that they were not able to take over previously. All of it starting with genetic variation, all of it starting with mutation, all of it starting with sex, right, with mixing up the DNA. So all that allowed for mammals to diversify and fill in niches today. So a lot of our niches in life, if you think about even the niches we create in cities, as you create a big city and you take away habitat, and you have all this garbage laying around in the streets in New York City, for instance, on garbage day, I'd assume. When people throw food down in classrooms or on the rapid stop or at the bus stop, they throw a half-eaten sandwich away in the open garbage can. What are you producing? You're producing niches. You're giving resources. There are resources available. There's space available. There are no predators there. So what you end up having is rats and mice and roaches and coyotes and raccoons coming in and possums coming in and taking advantage of that available niche. Given enough time, predators will then come in and start to put natural selection pressure on those populations, or perhaps they outcompete each other. They're reproductively isolated, and you could get a different species. Now, of course, this would take thousands of years, millions of years, but in any case, that's what happened with mammals, and we call that adaptive radiation. The spread of these different populations, the spread of biodiversity, the spread of life, increasing biodiversity. So how were mass extinctions important for stimulating new biodiversity? I hope you understood that. I just explained it. How has the biodiversity of Earth changed since the origin of life? And I hope you got from all this that when you look at, if you graphed, right, biodiversity, over time, right, and you assume that by biodiversity, you mean how many different species. Maybe you started with just a few early on. They were only dealing with single-celled organisms, some bacteria, what have you. Then you started to increase some of that. Maybe you started with eukaryotes, really started to increase it. Say some protozoans. Then you had multicellular life like jellyfish or what have you. And then it radiated as niches started taking advantage. And then when it got to land and air, now you had a lot of biodiversity at dinosaurs. So biodiversity over time, it was probably an exponential growth curve. Probably had a lot of biodiversity in a very short period of time. But then something happens, big climatic change, it got really cold or it got really hot. And the chart actually does look like this. It starts to increase a little, and then you have this explosion of biodiversity. Maybe something happens, another cataclysm, another meteor, another, carbon dioxide levels increase because of volcanic activity, or in this case of our mass extinction now because of human caused carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere. You have a big crash in biodiversity again. And it just keeps going up and down over time. Each one of these defines, right? Each one of these defines an era, a new time of the dinosaur, time of the mammals, the time of the jellyfish, the time of the bacteria, the prokaryote. Every as time goes on, each new adaptive rate, each new cataclysmic event, each new mass extinction creates niches that allow for adaptive radiation that allows for this biodiversity to increase again. Now, to be clear, this time is really big. So we're talking millions of years, right? Look, 2.5 million years ago, and it took, 50 million years, 20 million years to go from 20 million years, the beginning of the early Paleozoic, another 50 million years for this era lasted 50 million years. And then how long for the later Paleozoic era? You had from 435, where you have adaptive radiations occurring, 435 to 500, 20 million years of adaptive radiation, right? We have marine invertebrates, which are these things here, things without a vertebral column, right? Trilobites, etc., led to early fishes, right? These are vertebrates. Now understand, fish have vertebra. Humans have vertebra. We're related to fish. Not all creatures have vertebra. Insects, for instance, do not. The vast swamps, the first vascular plants that have tissues, plants that have leaves, that have roots, that have stems, not all plants have that. Moss, for instance, does not have vascular tissue. That's why they can grow on rocks. They don't need soil. They don't have roots. So the origin of adaptive radiation in reptiles starts, right? First vascular plants, that's these guys with different tissues. Then you have reptiles, they start to radiate, they start to take in the different spread. Now look at how much time it took for that increase in biodiversity to occur from 435 to 280 million years ago. So that's 150 some odd million years it took for this to occur. 150 million years for this radiation to occur, for this biodiversity to increase. Then another 40 million years later, there was a mass extinction. Almost all species ended. Then 40 million years after that, you have organisms recovering, organisms growing, dinosaurs, fish, mammals, gymnosperms, right? They become the predominant land plants. So the gymnosperms are those plants that don't produce fruits. They produce seeds without fruit. So things like pine, the conifers, the pine trees, they become the dominant plant on the planet. Then you get dinosaurs and you get small mammals, the early little rodent, like mouse-looking mammals running around. Another from 240 for about 205 all the way up to 65 million years ago, right? That's a few 100 million years. Dinosaurs ruled the planet. Biodiversity was at a peak. But then something happened. The asteroid impact hit and wiped out almost every dinosaur, except those that were bird-like. And then from 65 million years ago to about 1.65 million years ago, so about 65 million years, you had your adaptive radiation. You had your angiosperms take over, which are the flowering plants, insects and birds. See, plants also changed. The ruling plants also changed. By ruling, I mean the majority of plants on the planet. Obviously, when we say that gymnosperms are still around, we still have pine trees. We still have early vascular plants. Not all the species survived, but some of them did. But the conditions change, and the advantage of having a flower, especially when you have insects and birds, to help the organisms mix up their DNA, right, as the bee flies from flower to flower pollinating, allowing them to mix up their DNA even more, allowing them to take it over more and more niches because of the genetic variation that they're able to accrue over time. Flowering plants, insects, birds, mammals, they all start to fill in all those niches, all those major shifts. You have major shifts in climate, you have ice ages, you have up and down the climate. So these organisms that lived at this point had to be organisms that could deal with that. Early humans, about 3 million years ago, 3 to 5 million years ago, start to rise. So you have early hominids start to walk the earth, and hunt. And about 1.65 million years ago, we have modern humans evolved. So about 1.65 million years ago, hunting activities, cave drawings, you have different species of humans running around. But what we call modern humans were walking around for about 1.65 million years ago. So the point is that you have this up and down of biodiversity over time, but that this up and down, this time, is big. It's almost unimaginable. Millions of years it takes for this to happen. Now the problem with the mass extinction that we have today that's going to be different, and we're not, I mean, I don't know if anyone knows how. We can make some guesses, but we don't know how it's going to be different. But the mass extinction that's happening now is happening in a much shorter period of time, where in the past these extinctions took a lot of time to happen. You know, the creatures didn't just all die. Dinosaurs didn't just, meteor hit, everybody's dead. It wasn't a nuclear weapon. I'm sure a lot died at the moment, but it took them a long time for species to end. There were survivors that fought all the way up to the end, but eventually all the dinosaurs died out. That allowed for individuals to be born and survive that could take up those niches. Time allows for mutations to occur. Time allows for populations to increase to the point where they can take advantage, they can support each other, they can take advantage of resources, they could survive smaller infections, smaller epidemics, or whatever else is going to happen that would take out a tiny population. As long as there's plenty of time for individuals to have babies, a few might die, but some would survive. The problem with the mass extinction we're going through now is it's so fast. A lot of scientists are wondering how many of these species are going to be able to adapt, how many of these species are going to be able to accrue those mutations quick enough to take advantage of those niches as they have in the past. All right, I hope this helped you understand mass extinction. Mass extinction, biodiversity, adaptive radiation, and what geologic time has to do with it. So again, Berkeley Understanding Evolution is a really great source. I'll be emailing you the website. All right, I hope this helped, and I hope you can answer now these questions in your own words as best well. I hope you can answer them well, since I explained them, I think, decently. All right. Again, keep safe, stay out of crowds. See you soon.